For Georgia, you know, the West plays against itself because the West comes at an attitude of, if you're not going to play by my rules, I'm going to take my toys out of your sandbox, and then I'm going to turn your sandbox over and hack it up with a chainsaw. That's the concept of the West. You either do what we say, or we're going to try to destroy everything you are. So about 2.5 months ago, the U.S. Congress passed a law of bringing democracy to Georgia. Let that sink in. We don't agree with the choice of the people, so we're going to give you our choice, and we're going to shove it down your throat, doing whatever we can do. We're going to put our efforts into revolutioning your government out and shoving our puppets in, because that's democracy.
Hello everybody, this is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm talking again to Stanislav Krapivnik, a former US Army officer, supply chain executive, and military political expert. Stas, welcome back to the channel.
Thank you, always a pleasure.
Glad to have you back, because we said we want to discuss a bit Georgia and the Caucasus, because a lot of things have been happening, and I actually just recorded a video earlier with two other colleagues, and I would love to also get your take on what's going on in well, let's start with Georgia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my background in Georgia is well, it's I won't say super extensive, but it's extensive. I was a military advisor in Georgia for the UN mission back in 2002 to 2003. Uh, so that's how I got to know the country. I have some relatives here, relations, so I come back here often enough. I was also here. I was here on vacation in 22. So this is when all the anti-Russian propaganda was at its peak. I was here in 2024, first on vacation, and you could see the day and night shift and the collapse of the propaganda. And we were there right after the May Maidan attempt. And then I was here covering the elections and the first protests that broke out after the elections. Well, to say they were broke out is ridiculous. They were absolutely planned and prepared, and everybody knew when they were going to be, what time they were going to be, including the authorities, obviously. So
yeah, and you occasionally visit all the way to Georgia. You've had this like 20-year history with Georgia, and over this time, like, how did the country change?
Oh, it changed incredibly. I hadn't driven in Georgia since 2003. That came back. We drove down in 2022, and it's the male root instinct. You still remember where you drive, but I could remember the roads, but half the buildings were different. Yeah, they'd been rebuilt, or new buildings had taken their place. So yeah, it was kind of a poking around. I think this is where we're going. Yeah, because the country had physical change. I mean, I'd been there since between that times, but I was always on a taxi or something like that. So you kind of notice what's going on around you, but it's not the same as when you're behind the wheel. So the country's changed quite a bit, and there's a huge construction projects on the edges. Georgia took an extremely intelligent position in 2022 when it said it was going to be neutral. And this is considering under massive strain, external and internal. First and foremost, just to understand Georgia, Georgia is actively breaking away from being a colony of the West. Saakashvili fully tied it to the West, especially after the 2008 war. And the interesting thing about the 2008 war, right before the 2008 war, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin proposed to Georgia the 3+1 talks. So that's Georgia, Abkhazia, South Ossetia, plus Russia. And the aim of those talks was to form a confederacy where those two provinces would return into Georgia's fold, similar to what happened with Ajaria. To the southwest, where the capital of Ajaria is Batumi. It has broad powers of autonomy. And Saakashvili agreed. And the moment he agreed, Condoleezza Rice came galloping over, and we got the 2008 war. Because the last thing the Americans want is peace to break out. God forbid peace breaks out. Because war and conflict is always the leverage and the coin that they pay their way through. So that then ruined relations for quite a long time. That war, and even though the anti-Russian hawks are still screaming that Russia started that war, which it didn't. There was an EU commission, and the EU is anything even back then than on the Russian side. There was an EU commission that came out and said, yes, absolutely, the Georgians started the war. They had reasons, they tried to excuse that. But yes, the Georgians fired the first shots. The Georgians invaded. And when I was in Georgia in 2002, I knew the special forces guys because I hung out and drank beer with them, who were setting up the first American brigades. By American, I mean American trained brigades. So Shevardnadze had agreed to allow them to set up 2 brigades. So they were doing the filtration, getting the right, not so much physically the right specimens, but mentally the right specimens, if you understand what I'm saying. And then that got handed over to the U.S. Marine Corps. The Marines were here doing this setting up or standing them up into 2 brigades. And these brigades were used then by the U.S. government to help overthrow Shevardnadze and put in Saakashvili. And then Saakashvili used those 2 brigades as the leading spear tips in his attack on South Ossetia. And, if you're going to commit genocide or attempted genocide, the good idea is to take the cell phones away from your people. Because they were videotaping themselves and bragging how they're killing civilians and blowing up apartments and cars with women and children in. And there was a whole documentary film that came out after that, because once these 2 brigades got wiped out by the Russian army that came south, broke through various ambushes, came south. The Georgians were trying to blow up the tunnels from North Ossetia to South Ossetia, but they failed to do that. Their special forces teams failed to do that. They were destroyed. So the tunnels were open. The Russian army came charging through, which nobody expected to happen, because Medvedev was in charge. The Russian force that was sitting in the Caucasus was a 3rd echelon force, old equipment, not the best training. And the Russian army at that time wasn't the best training either, overall. And it came charging down and bulldozed its way to Stanislav to save the population. And the interesting thing that happened was one of the leading officers was saying, as they were driving down, because these 2 Georgian brigades leading the charge, they were just exterminating everybody. And just to understand, South Ossetia had a population of about 40,000 people. And we're not talking a huge population. The soldiers, there was an article written by one of the officers in the leading BMPs. He said, we could see a church off in the distance, and the cross started to glow, and an image came down from the cross, and a woman was walking toward us out of that light, walking by us and blessing us as we were going by, the Virgin Mary. And that motivated him quite a bit.
So that's the start of the Russian soldiers going through and into South Ossetia.
The tip point of the Russian counter. So, and they got as far as Gori, and partially Gori was saved. Gori is maybe like 35, well, I guess about close for 50 kilometers away from Tbilisi, edge of Tbilisi. And Gori was saved because the Russian army was there, because the South Ossetians were coming through and then counter-killing Georgians as revenge for this offensive. So the Russian army was there and kept the peace before they pulled back out. So a friend of mine was telling me that, and he's Georgian living in Tbilisi, that when the Russian army was in Gori, the Saakashvili government threw in a bunch of conscripts that hadn't even gone to training yet. So these guys were good. First day they're heading to training, they just gave them rifles and threw them against the Russian army. Well, predictably happened. What predictably happened? They looked at the Russian tanks. They looked at the BMPs. But there are, so they didn't have any BMPs. They had, but there are the wheel transport of armored vehicles. They threw down their rifles and they ran away. Again, these are guys that first time they're holding a rifle and they're sent into combat against veterans. Predictably, this isn't going to turn out well. And they ran to Tbilisi screaming, "The Russians are coming." They said, half the people were packing up their things to run, and half the people were pulling out Russian flags because they hated Saakashvili, and they saw that the Russians were going to come and remove Saakashvili. Unfortunately, the Russian army didn't come to Tbilisi. It stopped at Gori. So there were a lot of very upset people after that. And Saakashvili lost power, I think, within a year and a half or so, 2 years after that.
Around 2010.
Yeah. And when he was leaving, Saakashvili, when he lost power, because there were several videos that came out. First of all, before that, a video came out of the massacres that his forces were committing. Basically, the FSB came through and just picked up the cell phones off the dead guys, hacked them, pulled their videos off of, and just made a documentary out of their own words, out of their own actions. It's hard to deny this who was doing what to whom. From that. Secondly, videos started coming out right before the elections. See, the Georgian government changed from being a presidential republic to being a parliamentary republic. And Saakashvili decided that because his presidential second term was up, his party would win the elections and he would be the perpetual prime minister with the real power, because the president would not just be a figurehead. So from here on down, I'll be prime minister for life. Well, right before he got the elections happened, a bunch of videos came out of physical, sexual torture in the prisons in Georgia. And there were probably that 7-8% of the population was imprisoned. And he threw people in prison for just about anything. It's one way to make law and order, but they were being tortured. They were being abused. And all of that came pouring out, and his party lost big time. So he lost power. So in his little revenge, first thing he did, he started giving out citizenship to everybody. I mean, I'm talking about you come in with any kind of ID, and in 20 minutes you're walking out a brand new citizen of Georgia. So Africans, Chinese, and others in Tbilisi that were either working here or visiting, but that's a minor issue. The big problem was in Azaria, where he gave it out to the Turks, who then brought it in their families and their extended families. And now you have problems. You have ethnic problems in Azaria. You have the Turks are almost half the population in Azaria, and there's now got to the point where they're screaming at the Orthodox Georgians, "Get off our land." And about a year and a half ago, you had Erdogan in Riza, which is a city further west in Turkey itself, also on the coast, giving a speech. He said, I'm standing in Riza, I'm looking over at Batumi. This is all our land. I mean, that's a government head already putting out a direct claim on the province of another nation. And the only thing that's keeping the Turks out of Georgia is Russia, because there's no way in hell Russia is going to allow the Turks to annex Georgia.
Are you really worried that might be on the Turkish agenda to actually get slices of Georgia?
Absolutely. They do it through business investment and demographics. And then when they get to a certain critical mass, they just rip that piece away. Absolutely. And I doubt it if Erdogan leaves tomorrow that much about this is going to change. The pan-Turkeyism is pretty strong across the border.
Because, I mean, this is where you also need to bring in Azerbaijan and the entire instability now in the three South Caucasus republics, because basically Azerbaijan managed to, by force of weapon, get Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenia is the Pashinyan is selling out a good part of the interests of the country, and by just not just letting that happen, but actively now having talks with the EU and maybe not NATO, but at least the EU, and cuddling up to them very, very much. While Azerbaijan seems to be dreaming of a larger Azeri state, including parts of Iran, and giving Israel even staging ground for attacks on Iran. I mean, can you speak a little bit to this? It seems to me that some people now calculate that the Caucasus is up for grabs.
In a way, it is. Well, the Caucasus are in a conflict zone. They're not going to be up for grabs. Well, Azerbaijan may disappear, but it's not going to be up for grabs. The Georgians, first of all, to understand the Georgians, the way they took control of Georgia for so many years, is this is a country of 3.5 million people. It has 10,000 registered NGOs. Let that sink in. 10,000 plus registered NGOs. I think the numbers getting less relatively quickly because the government started banning certain NGOs. This is why, obviously, having a law that has transparency of funding was something that nobody except the Georgian government and the nationalist element in Georgia wanted. Because, God forbid, you'd see how much money U.S. aid, the EU fund for development, all these other NGOs are flooding into the country, into these smaller NGOs. They're then feeding anti-Georgian sentiment inside the country, because the first thing that any of these countries do is they attack the culture of the country itself. And what do you attack with attack the culture of a Christian country? You go after the church. That's the first thing you do to break down the country.
This is now what exactly Armenia is doing. The Armenian government is cracking down on the Armenian church. And Georgia, the Georgian Dream, as far as I know, is not cracking down on their church, right? But that is what the forces would like to happen.
Yeah, the Georgian Dream. You see what they did before they started actively breaking away, and I think probably the start of the conflict in 22 moved their time scale up somewhat. Before they started breaking away, they were quietly removing the American officers out of the police and the military. What I mean by American officers is officers that were trained in the U.S. Something, by the way, that the Turks did too after the coup against Erdogan that Russia warned them about. Because what happens is on these training programs, these exchange programs, as one Turkish general said, we send off one person, we get back somebody totally different. Because they're getting worked over, right? They're getting brainwashed. They're getting bought. Something the CIA does is it buys officers. Well, not advise, it employs them. So you could be a colonel in your country's military, but you're a captain in the CIA. So you got your citizenship and citizenship for your family, U.S. family, hanging there at the house. So you go do what we tell you to do. You serve us, and if the whole country collapses, don't worry. You've got a landing strip back here in the U.S. and you've got a job and everything. So they take care of their spies and traitors that they plant in the governments of other countries. So the Georgian Dream was steadily getting rid of these people, and this is why this last Maidan totally failed. Because if you go down the Maidan playlist, and these people aren't original, they got more or less a working playlist, and this is what they're going to run down step by step by step. So they got the crowd into the streets. They got part of the bureaucracy that self-identified themselves as anti-government liberals, who are, by the way, now being fired en masse. Thanks for identifying yourself. No, they weren't expecting to be fired en masse. They're expecting success. Well, they got to the step where, at this point, at this step, about a third or half the military and police go over to the side of the revolutionaries. Well, here's the problem. What do the revolutionaries offer? They offer all the liberal, neoliberal values. Well, by this point, the Georgian Dream had replaced those questionable officers in the police and the military with good Georgian Orthodox Christians. They were looking at this. We don't want pride parades. We don't want the Georgian culture destroyed. We don't want anti-church crusades. No, there's nothing that the revolutionaries were offering that these people were buying. So at that point, it fiddled out because it didn't have that next adrenaline shot, that stimulus that would have carried it into an open armed conflict. They tried. They tried very hard. They even put children out. Families came out with children. Some of these liberal families came out with children, believe it or not. And they were pushing the kids out front because, well, the organizers. There were even, there's videos of 7, 8-year-olds being given rocks to throw at the police. And the reason they're putting the children out is they were hoping to get a major police response and sacrifice those children on the altar of revolution. You know, if a kid gets injured or even better, killed, or a couple of kids get killed, they can start screaming about the bloodthirsty government and what the government is doing, which thankfully, and they did the same thing under Navalny in Russia, that pull in 10, 12-year-olds through the internet. Hey, let's have an adventure. And then they push them up front against the police. But everybody had already caught on to this game, so the police were extremely restrained. Make sure nothing came flying, no kid got injured, because then that's going to be used propaganda.
And we're talking now about what happened in November, December last year, and the Georgian police was actually extremely restrained because these protesters were firing fireworks at the parliament building and using laser pointers in order to try to blind police officers. All while Western media was saying the right to protest, to peacefully protest, must be protected. If anything like this had happened in Berlin, Jesus Christ, I guarantee they would have mobilized the army and cracked down and put these used extreme violence and said like, we need to protect our democratic values and stuff like that. But with Georgia, it was the European Union kept yelling at the top of its lungs, you need to let this happen. Now, luckily, they managed to taper it out. How did they successfully let it just like fizzle out?
Oh, it's still going on. If you can call it that. There are groups of 10, 20 people that come out there and they sit around. They don't even protest loudly. They just sit around with signs. They get paid $50 a day, which is pretty damn good money for just.
Do we have proof of that? Is there proof that there are payments involved in this?
Yes, I have friends in the Georgian Dream government, and I was talking with them in the higher echelons of the Georgian Dream government. And one of them was like, I even asked, can I come out because I need some extra money? The police don't pay attention to them. They just walk by them, and they've been out there for every day for. They'll show up toward the evening. They'll surround a few hours. They'll get their money's worth. Put some signs up, and they'll go away. But this is kind of the presence. It's petered out. I mean, it's totally petered out by the end of December. Well, by the end of January, it was less than 100 people showing up. Now, the first meeting, I'll tell you, the very first meeting after the elections, and what I love is the democracy people. You know, the people that are coming out, foreigners, so are coming out. In this case, the EU and the US. Talking about how they can't accept the Georgian elections. I'm sorry, it's not yours to accept, it's the people's to accept. And one of the things the Georgian Dream did very, very correctly is they put giant posters up. And one, as an example, one of the posters on the right side in color, you have a Georgian city bus taking its route. And on the other side, you have in black and white, you have a burned out Ukrainian bus and a blown up building. And the simple message was, do you want peace or war? I mean, you didn't have to get deep and in the number of the party to vote for, because it's all the party lists are by numbers.
The funny thing is, like in Western media, this was we were constantly told that conspiracy theorists in Georgia are arguing that the West wants to push Georgia to be a second front and be plunged into war. This is obviously exactly the kind of strategy that's going on at this, and also like when you listen to what the figurehead, this French witch, Tsurabishvili, Salome Zurabishvili, the former French ambassador to Georgia, who's then made a citizen, right, and then became president, and she actually did that, and she had to leave, right. The whole point was geared toward somehow transitioning power to her.
Well, the thing is, she was just a figurehead. She has no real power, but the key power she has is amnesty. So up to the point that she left, every time they arrested these people for any reasons that they had, disturbance of the peace, whatever, she just said amnesty them out. So it's a revolving door. They couldn't put any of these people away. So the moment she left, they also let everyone know that this has ended, and civil disturbance is going to carry a serious term of 6 years. And a lot of those people petered out real quick. And they said, "Oh, okay, this is so we're actually going to have to answer for it." And in 24, when I was there for my elections in 24, Rustaveli is a very beautiful street. They have lots of artwork, statues up and down the street. I'm sorry, when I was there for vacation in the summer of 24. Some people may hate me for saying this, but I don't care. Liberalism International, and believe me, there is a liberal international. They pump people over from different countries to go to protests of different countries. When you let the pigs into your house, you're going to expect what's going to happen to your house. They graffitied everything. The ground, the walls, the statues, everything. And as far as they could reach, sitting on somebody's shoulders, they graffitied every single building, historic buildings, new buildings, it didn't matter. They graffitied the ground. They graffitied statues. They burnt benches. They burnt trash bins. I mean, it's like a infestation of locusts. And they just destroyed everything they could destroy along the way. And you look at the city, I mean, the amount of money that has to be spent to fix everything, to clean everything up. I mean, it's disgusting. Okay, you've gone to a foreign country to protest. At least don't destroy it in the process. But these are people that have absolutely no moral compass. The means justify the ends. And they did the same thing again after the protests. When the protests turned more violent, as they had to by the playbook. But as far as this conspiracy theory, Gibarashvili, who was a former prime minister of Georgia, he came out and said, Pompeo on his goodbye tour stopped off in Georgia and said, "Look, we need you to start combat actions on the Russian border, or at least in the South Ossetian and the Abkhazian border." Like, why would we do that? Because you're going to draw the Russian army into the conflict. Like, why would we do that? Russia will crush us. That's right, they will. But then you can do a partisan war for years and tie the Russians down. Like, wait a minute, wait. What's in this for us? We're going to destroy our country, have our people murdered off in a perpetual grinding war on our own soil. Why would we do this? Because the West needs you to do this.
This is I mean, even if he said it in different words, it all boils down to that one. And actually in Ukraine, this is exactly the what Ukraine got. And I keep saying, like, into the Georgia is the one who got away, but not from Russia. It got away from this neocon brink of suicide for other people's great strategic ambitions. The thing is, of course, that this earns you a lot of hate in those neocon circles. So how is this because they're not done, they never give up. So what is currently going on this front, even though things have calmed down on the street?
Well, the Georgian economy grew by 2024. The Georgian economy in 2 years had grown 20%. And it had a growth rate, it's looking at 11% growth rate this year. Because Georgia is right now between Turkey and Russia, massive amount of traffic going through Georgia, large amounts of Georgian-Russian trade, investment that's heading in. So the Georgians came out very good from that point of view. And Georgia is not a resource-rich country. It grows more or less its own food. I'm talking about consumption goods like bread, grains. But it still has to import. And imports from Russia. A lot of its energy is coming from Russia. and it's relatively got good relation. And and partially this is because the Russian government finally remembered what soft power was. After the Soviet Union, the people in power just absolutely forgot what soft power was. They went ignorant on soft power. So the things that Russia did was first it loosened, then it fully removed any restrictions on any visa regime on Georgians coming in. I'll give Saakashvili this credit. He did remove restrictions at the very end on visa restrictions on Russians coming in because he needed money to tourism and such. Russia removed that. Georgians can stay in Russia as long as they want. Now they just have to, like anybody that's a foreigner, if you're staying with somebody or in a hotel, you have to get registered that you're in that location. Or if you're staying with family members, you have to register. So when we have relatives come over, they have to we register them that hey they're here for however long. That's one. Two, the Russian government started making a lot of overtures, and it created a lot of free positions in universities for Georgians, for Georgian students. So I mean, fully government paid by the Russian government. So that this gives a lot more opportunities, and it creates a different level of bond because the Georgians they've been propagandized just like the Ukrainians and other things that Russians are coming in stealing toilets and we're all walking in lapti. Lapti, if you don't know what I mean, is a shoe made out of bark, right? Which actually if you have no resources at all, it's actually a pretty good shoe, all things considered, for that. And if you have no real resources, but yeah, so it's something that the peasants wore in the villages, 150, 200, 300 years ago. So that this is the level mentality the Russians are living, in pigsties and so on and so on. But when the Georgians they come over, they're usually in massive shock because everything they're being told by the Western NGOs and reality, it doesn't jive. Moscow is probably the most advanced city in all of Europe. Not just by cleanliness, but by infrastructure and by telecommunication infrastructure. So that's helped solidify and it's got to the point. I will tell you another thing that helped was the Georgian Legion that's fighting for Ukraine. It actually a lot of those people in the Georgian legions are Saakashvili's former people, his former militants. But what they started putting up videos of their deeds, their great bravery when they're cutting throats of surrendered soldiers, or shooting them in the back, or shooting them in the head, where these guys are on their knees with their hands tucked behind their backs. So these videos started filtering into Georgia. And the Georgians are in shock because they have we're mountain warriors, this honor code, you don't kill prisoners, you don't beat, there's a set of things you don't do. And and what they're seeing is Georgians yelling in Georgian, and clear Georgian murdering civilians, murdering POWs, and videotaping themselves. Big pride. Nazis like to do that. I don't know why. It's something that the Nazis have been doing since 1941.
It's a psychological issue. It's what the Israelis are doing currently in Gaza, right? It's at some point like dehumanizing the other becomes so obvious that it's basically like having a walk on the street, right? And you just want to share with others the joys that you're going through. It's something like that must be happening on a very twisted psychological level.
It has because the Nazis. And not just the German Nazis. Let's not forget we were fighting most of Europe in 1941. They would send photos to their families to show the kids that they're executing civilians. I mean, there's a certain level of serious insanity. You want to share the experience with your little kids, how I was killing other little kids. I mean, geez, that you understand that these people are mentally deranged. Absolutely. So the Georgian Legion was doing the same thing, and this was a very big shock to the Georgian population. I got to see these videos, and I'm proud to say there is now a Georgian battalion being trained in Russia of Georgian volunteers, not Georgians from Russia, because there's about 2 million, million and a half Georgians living in Russia on a permanent basis, but Georgian volunteers coming out of Georgia. They're now training and getting ready to go into combat on the Russian side. As you can see, this has gone from basically a Russian on Ukrainian-Russian civil war. At least from the Russian side, it's looking at civil war. This is piling up with a lot of people, lots of grievances that are now fighting it out on the Ukrainian territory. There's lots of Africans that want revenge against the Europeans. There's Arabs on both sides. The Islamics are on the Ukrainian side. Syrian soldiers and others that want revenge for what happened in Syria on the Russian side.
I mean, in your assessment, actually, I mean, there's also on the periphery of Russia now, people being drawn in, of course, into this battlefield. But what does this mean for Georgia? Also, the way that the war in Ukraine is now, I mean, has definitely turns against Ukraine. We are now at the point where there's demonstrations against Mr. Zelensky in Ukraine. We are at the point where we get this news from Seymour Hersh that apparently the US decided to drop Zelensky and then have him replaced. We don't know whether that's true, but the signs look as if though there's now power struggle in or about Kiev from the inside, not from the Russian advances. How is this also impacting Georgia?
Well, as far as Ukraine, I'll tell you this: you can judge whether or not the U.S. has decided to drop Zelensky, but whether or not these demonstrations peter out. The problem with any of these Maidan demonstrations, if they don't have proper funding, and in this case, it would have to be funding from outside of Ukraine, they will all peter out because of lack of funding and because Ukraine is an absolute police state. People will be disappeared left and right that are showing up. Believe me, ISBU rips in places like Kharkov, rips phones out of people's hands, checks to see if they have Russian relatives that have been writing to Russia or have been reading any Russian blogs or what have you, and arrest them on the spot. A lot of these people just disappeared, taken out, shot, murdered. When Mariupol fell, there were a lot of when Mariupol finally fell, and people started digging deeper into a lot of these areas that had been demolished. They started finding mass bodies. There was one concentration camp set up in a gas station where they were using the tanks, the emptied petro tanks, this petrol station to drop the corpses into it. There's just massive amount of corpses. So we can judge by if these demonstrations have legs, if the U.S. government really wants to get rid of Zelensky. Now, having said that, for Georgia, the West plays against itself because the West comes at an attitude of if you're not going to play by my rules, I'm going to take my toys out of your sandbox, and then I'm going to turn your sandbox over and hack it up with a chainsaw. That's the concept of the West. You either do what we say, or we're going to try to destroy everything you are. So about 2.5 months ago, the U.S. Congress passed a law of bringing democracy to Georgia. Let that sink in. We don't agree with the choice of the people, so we're going to give you our choice, and we're going to shove it down your throat, doing whatever we can do. We're going to put our efforts into revolutioning your government out and shoving our puppets in, because that's democracy. About a month later, the UK signed the same thing, and about a week and a half ago, the EU signed the same thing about bringing democracy to Georgia. So democracy means spit on the will of the people. We're going to shove down our puppet down your throat, whether you like it or not. And the people see this, obviously. They see this. Their choice, this is what Western democracy means. We're going to spit on your choice.
But Stas, I must politely disagree. I mean, thanks to similar measures, we now have a democratic president of Syria. I mean, a holy person, right? A man of God who's now ruling Syria. I mean, that must be a good example for where Georgia could go.
My only question for that, when the EU leadership and Trump shook the hands of Jalani, did they lick the blood of Christian children off their hand or wash it off?
I don't know. I mean, it looks at this point really whether that it's even more nefarious, as in, make sure you install somebody who then later can be legitimately fought against by the Israelis in order to chop off the country even more. So in a form, like, Syria looks to me like even more of a case of why everybody in the region needs to get their grip together and not follow those stupid playbooks. It's not just Ukraine, it's Syria too. And the nation is blown up completely.
Sure.
While
The Arab leadership, they are like the Kappas, the Kappas in the concentration camps. You know what a Kappa was?
Yeah, yeah.
For those that don't know, a Kappa were inmates in the Nazi concentration camp that ran the concentration camp inside. It wasn't Germans going into the barracks, beating people and driving them to either the gas chamber or to work. It was the Kappas and they were inmates themselves, and their job was to be the last one standing. The alligator may eat me, but I'll survive longer than everyone else. So it's the same thing with most of the Arab leadership. Now you get the back up into the Caucasus area. The problem with for Georgia is it's Armenia. Armenia, because the Armenia with the anti-Armenian in power is a breeding ground for attempted revolutionary movements into Georgia. The anti-Armenian, it's amazing. First of all, people that lose wars as pathetically as he has normally wind up dead if they're the leader. Minimally, they're exiled. Most of the time, they're killed by either their generals or by the people. Mussolini comes to mind amongst other people, the Mussolini effect. But no, this guy got reelected. When the Armenian War broke out, the first one in Karabakh, I mean, the first one out of in this decade. One of my friends is a major in the Russian reconnaissance and intelligence. He was sent down to see what was really going on in the Karabakh. And their first step was Yerevan. And they spent a couple of days in Yerevan, sitting around the cafes, looking and talking to the people, looking around. Said, all the people were convinced that the Armenian army was on the edge of Baku and they were winning the war. And we're telling them, no, ladies and gentlemen, it's quite the opposite. The Armenian forces in the Karabakh have been wiped out. They're looking at them like they were enemy number one. Then they said that the most of the men in Yerevan, they weren't trying to fight. And the people that were going to fight, the volunteers that were coming in, Armenian and other volunteers from around the world, they had to sneak into the Karabakh because the Pashtunian, the anti-Armenian, closed the border with the Karabakh and wouldn't allow anybody to go there and fight. He basically hung the people out to dry, right? And these people were armed with very antiquated weaponry, all things considered. Well, the Turkish Bayraktar showed itself to be such a powerful weapon, but once it got used in Ukraine, it was being shot down in droves by the Russian anti-air system because the force in the Karabakh had no anti-air system. It was even reported that during right before one of the final Azerbaijani drives, they had amassed their troops, and Pashinyan's generals wanted to use Iskandar missiles to wipe out this concentration of troops. And Pashinyan told them, no, the world will never forgive me if I kill so many Azerbaijanis. So the anti-Armenian has no problem with Armenians being destroyed in mass in combat, and then the civilians being genocided or ethnically cleansed, but he has a problem with killing his enemies in a war. So already you understand where all of this stands. The problem on Russia's side, Russia it's taking the gloves off. It should have taken the gloves off back then. But Russia is trying to play the white and fluffy role. And when the Azerbaijanis downed a Russian helicopter in Armenia, the proper response should have been to wipe out everything that was flying Azerbaijani, that was flying over Azerbaijan and Karabakh. Just take Russia has the PVOs, the anti-air system. The proper response for the Azerbaijani government to understand its position was for Russia to have downed everything, at least for one day, just denied any air capability. It didn't. And Aliyev said, oh, we'll have a commission, we'll pay some money out to the families as compensations for the killed pilots and crew, and so on and so on. But Russia, in that case, showed weakness.
Yeah, but the problem Russia had is that, and Vladimir Putin said that at the time, we have a strategic agreement with Armenia, but Armenia never asked for help. We were not asked to intervene on their behalf. So what am I to do? Actually, Vladimir Putin said so. What am I supposed to do if they don't ask for help?
Oh, I absolutely agree. The Russian army couldn't go in there. But as I said again, when the Azerbaijanis downed a Russian helicopter over in Armenian airspace, the response should have been one to smack them back in the teeth. Then everything would have calmed down. But since we didn't do that, that encouraged them that they could go further. We have issues now with Azerbaijan, serious issues, but Azerbaijan, everything Azerbaijan has, and it's playing the role of a second Ukraine. Everything that Azerbaijan has is linchpinned on the anti-Armenians staying in power. Because Azerbaijan, except for its exclave, a little bit of its exclave, it really has no border with Turkey. And it's surrounded by enemies, or what is created into enemies. And just to understand the extension of Aliyev's egoistical approach, first of all, the people that were arrested in Russia, two of them died. One of them died during the arrest from a heart attack. Another one died later it's not quite understandable why. They were criminals. These people were mafia, ethnic mafia. Well, mafia is always ethnic. No matter what country you're in, a mafia is always structured on some ethnicity because they always prey on their own people. But the arrest, I mean, they were arrested on proper charges. The arrest may have been done improperly. That's a whole different thing, and that's a commission that needs to investigate why the second guy particularly died, because it's not understood while he was being arrested. The first guy died from a heart attack. He was aged and he was not in good shape. So, and again, maybe they should have reviewed how he was arrested too. But they were all Russian citizens. They were Azeri nationality, but they were all Russian citizens. When Azerbaijan grabbed Russian programmers, the guys, the liberals that ran away back when mobilization started, and beat the crap out of them, because, I mean, they were heavily beaten. You could see their faces were swollen up. And then it graded them around as drug dealers or other things like that. They upped the ante. Russia countered the ante with by first they had already lost a Haifa refinery. I'm not sure how damaged it is, but it's not working right now, and that's Azeri oil. And then Russia took out two more refineries in Ukraine, which it really should have taken out in 22. Nobody can understand why they weren't demolished before that. They finally got demolished. One was owned by BP. The other one was owned by Sakor, which is the oil company of Georgia, which feeds directly Aliyev's pockets. And those guys, by the way, in Russia that were arrested, they were part of Aliyev's gang, basically, his criminal elements. And there's about 2 million Armenians. I'm sorry, Armenians. There's about 2 million Azeris that live in Russia. And what's now coming out is and I'm not saying this against all Azeris by thought, but the criminal element, which works directly as an extension of the intelligence services of the Azerbaijanis, and thus of Mossad, SBU, and other CIA, MI6 inside of Russia. They were helping plan the attack on the strategic bombers, because their people are everywhere. So that came out, and I had known even before that. I've seen hard documents from the Russian government that showed that the Azerbaijani mafia was working actively with foreign intelligence services, which is why all these arrests were on a federal level, not on a local level. The local authorities are either intimidated or they're bought, or both. So the federal authorities went in and started breaking this up. Additionally, steps have been taken. This is continuing. It's not as loud now, but it is continuing. For example, a very large chunk of the Azerbaijani economy is actually tied to Russia on the agricultural sector. Russia is the third largest manufacturer of milk and milk products in the world. But for one reason or another, Russia was still importing from two Azerbaijani companies. Both of those companies have now been denied import licenses. So that's a big hit, because they don't have any place to dump their production. They can't do it in Iran because they've ruined relations with Iran. As far as Aliyev's imperial ambitions, first of all, the chief mufti of Azerbaijan stated that they're about to get all their Shia holy places back in Armenia, because the anti-Armenian is about to open up the border to mass Azerbaijani migration into Armenia. So, Azerbaijan is several times more populous than Armenia. There are a lot of Armenians all over the world. There's over 2 million Armenians inside of Russia. But inside Armenia itself, the population density is actually pretty low. So apparently the anti-Armenian is going to allow mass migration into Armenia and finally kill it off. Remember that when Russia was fighting the Persians in this portion of the world back in the 1820s, these were all Khaganates. There were no Christian governments in these areas, except in Tbilisi, and the Tbilisi government had almost been destroyed as a vassal that rebelled against Islamization from the Persians. The Persians came in, wiped out most of the population, and wiped out. I mean, there were 40,000 people in the Principality of Tbilisi when it joined the Russian Empire. Because 2 years prior, the Persian Expeditionary Force had left 150,000 corpses and took 250,000 slaves and went off back to Persia. Alexander I didn't want to go into the Caucasus, but his ministers pushed him into it because they said, these are Orthodox people that are going to be exterminated. As an Orthodox emperor, you cannot allow them to be exterminated or mass converted. So that was the reasons Russia went in back under Alexander I. So by the time we're talking about Nicholas II, Nicholas I, and Russia was continuing its move into the Caucasus, fighting with the Persians, it freed the Khaganate of Yerevan, which then became Armenia inside of the Russian Empire as a separate, as a semi-autonomous entity within the Russian Empire, and then under the Soviet Union and so on. So, but we're looking at that disappearing, the Armenian nation is possibly disappearing. Then, yes, there's the point that Azerbaijan is actually stacking troops on the Iranian border because they're expecting phase 2 of the war against Iran, and they're looking like they want to invade into Iran to try to grab northwestern Iran, whereas there's a large population of Azerbaijanis. And there's Dagestan. Dagestan, just so you understand, up until the Soviet Union, Dagestan was 70% Russian. Under the Soviet Union's pro-Russian policies, and I say that in quotes, the Russian population fell to like about 20% from 70%. Having said that, there are 36 different ethnic groups inside Dagestan. So you go from one village into the next, and you could be into a different ethnic group, which is why any fights usually turn into shooting matches between villages, because they're different ethnicities. And, the boys will start fighting over some girl, somebody knifes somebody else, and then all the men run out with rifles and start taking pot shots at each other. Two villages whacking each other because they're different ethnic groups, so now they have yet another reason to shoot each other. It's only the central federal power that keeps everything calm and peaceful. Well, the Azerbaijanis are the second largest minority or second largest ethnicity in Dagestan, which again, they're nowhere near a majority or anything that even looks like a majority. They're maybe about a 10% of the population, but they're now pushing Azerbaijani nationalism and that this is all our land, trying to create this partisan or guerrilla explosion in that area. So Azerbaijan has very, very big dreams of empire. It has very powerful neighbors. And by the way, Azerbaijan is holding parts of Georgia also, historical Georgian land, where they're wiping out the Orthodox Christian areas, just like, what, if we're going to be honest, what the Arabs in Jerusalem were doing to the remains of the Second Temple. They were just bringing in tractors at night and excavators and pulling all the remains out and just destroying them. I mean, we have to say what happens because both sides did lots of things. I'm not defending the Israeli genocide in any way, but there were steps taken by all sides that were less than humane and idiotic. Well, the Azerbaijanis are doing the same thing to the Georgian heritage. Now, to understand, the Azerbaijanis are not the original population of Azerbaijan. They're Turks. They came into that Turkic way. The Turks, what's called Turk now in Turkey, was never called Turkey because each of the Turkic tribes had their own names. The Ottomans, who were a Turkic people, conquered the other ones, like, for example, the Rom Turks, which held Trabzon and those areas. They steadily combined all of them under the Ottomans. They still didn't call them Turks. They called themselves Ottomans because that's the actual clan that, or the tribe that conquered the other tribes. It's only after Ataturk came to power that they started calling themselves Turks as a nationality. And all these other Turks, they're Turkic, like to say Slavic. You don't see the Czechs saying we're all Czech. They're saying, okay, and the Czechs are the Czechs, but they're Slavs as a general concept. Well, same thing
and
here.
it extends all the way across the Caspian Sea into Turkmenistan, right? I mean, it's even in the
It extends all the way into, they claim all the way into Western Altai and Central Russia. Ataturk has
just in a way to kind of tie it all up. What is your prediction about the political stability of the region as we now go forward? Because to me it looks as if though we are really in for a ride, and more insecurity gonna happen, especially between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Well, I have good sources that have told me that watch Armenia and prepare for a massive change. The only way you can consider that a massive change is Pashinyan losing power, maybe losing his life, and a different pro-Armenian government replacing the anti-Armenian. If that happens, because it seems Russia is finally sick and tired of it enough that to act. The Georgians aren't too thrilled with what's going on. The Iranians are irate, incredibly irate. So neither Pashinyan nor Aliyev have any friends in the area, obviously, except for the Turks. So if and Armenia is on the edge of well, it's constantly on the edge of revolution and civil war, but it's gotten much worse because the church has come out directly against Pashinyan. Pashinyan has arrested 2 archbishops and has said that he's going to save the Armenian church by his holiness is going to reform the Armenian church, make it a subservient whore of Babel for the anti-Armenian. And that's waking a lot of people up that maybe have figured, okay, we'll just wait this out. That no, there isn't going to be any waiting out. You go and act, and amongst the elites too. And now these things of all the Shia, all the old Shia holy sites are going to Azerbaijan because there's going to be mass migration, and people starting to actually realize that things have gotten much worse and the hours much later than they actually thought. So if this goes through. Again, if I can't guarantee, and Pashinyan it's out, Azerbaijan is going to find itself in a very difficult situation because all 4 of its actual major neighbors are going to be very stacked against it. And if Azerbaijan doesn't calm down, and I don't know if they have enough common sense to calm down, there's a lot of ego machoism among in the Caucasus. If Aliyev doesn't have the wherewithal to calm down and decides to continue on his imperial plans, especially when phase 2 against Iran starts, Azerbaijan could disappear. It could actually quite simply disappear because, it's got 4, at this point 3, but soon to have 4 enemies around it and a sea to its back. Not the best position, and there's no way that anybody can to supply them. If the Turks have to fight their way through the mountains, that's going to be a very expensive job for the Turks. They may just have to cut their losses. And that would be in direct conflict with Russia, too.
Tough region. But Stas, thank you very much for your assessments. People who want to read more from you, where should they go?
Okay, so you can find me on, first of all, I have videos out on YouTube at Mr. Slavic Man, Slavic with a K, not a C. They're coming a little slow right now because I'm on vacation, so for another week. I have Telegram channels, 2 Telegram channels. The Russian channel is Stas Today Obratno, and the English channel is Stas Was There. And I'm also on X at Stas Krapivnik.
Okay, I'll put that into the description below. Stas Krapivnik, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.